Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown and Choirmaster's Secret Killed the Girl, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. Father Brown Unveils the Truth. The last breath of the man sitting across from Father Brown was like a whisper in the wind, a final exhale that carried more than just air, it carried a confession. And yet, it was not enough. The room fell into an eerie silence as Father Brown sat, still as stone, looking at the dead man's eyes, the lie still hanging in the air. A truth buried so deep, no one could ever have expected it to surface. The murderer, Father Brown, the murderer is me, the man had whispered moments before dying. A death, a confession, and yet nothing made sense. The man, a notorious local noble, had been found lifeless, his face pale and drawn, his body lying cold in the confessional booth of St. Agnes's Church. No marks of violence, no signs of a struggle, just a cold, still body and the utterance of a fatal truth. Father Brown's heart raced with the suspicion that this was no ordinary death. The nobleman had known too much, and now he was gone. In his place, only a riddle, an incomplete puzzle that would haunt Father Brown's every waking hour. It was the perfect setup for a mystery, one that could only grow darker with each passing second. The police were in disarray, unable to make heads or tails of what had happened. The body, found in such a reverent place, only deepened the mystery. No one could understand why someone would choose a church to die in, nor why a confession would be spoken so cryptically. The scene was clean, almost too clean. No signs of a violent death, no struggle, and yet the sense of danger lingered in the air like a thick fog. Father Brown knew that what seemed like an easy case on the surface was anything but. The nobleman had many enemies, greedy relatives, jealous lovers, and rivals eager to seize his power. But there was something deeper, something darker, that gnawed at Father Brown's mind. The confession had come too easily, the mystery too neatly wrapped. Who was this man really? What truth did he hold that was so dangerous, so explosive, that it could not be uttered before death? As Father Brown made his way through the shadowed halls of the church, his mind whirled. He passed the cold stone walls, the muted echoes of prayers still lingering in the air. He knew the nobleman had been hiding something, and he could feel it, the darkness that had been allowed to fester, unchallenged. The truth was a weapon, and someone had used it against the dead man. The investigation led him to the heart of the manor, the estate where the nobleman had spent most of his life, a sprawling, cold structure that seemed to hold its secrets in every cracked wall, in every cobwebbed corner. He began his search quietly, observing the house, the people within it, their faces, each one a mask hiding something, and each mask a layer of the mystery. Then, in the library, amidst the dusty tomes and crumbling papers, Father Brown found something. A letter, its edges frayed with time. The ink was faded, the words almost illegible. But there was one sentence that jumped out, a chilling message that stopped Father Brown in his tracks. "If you tell the truth, you will destroy us all." The letter was signed only with a single cryptic initial. A. Who was this person? A. The mystery deepened with every discovery, with every shadow that passed by Father Brown's watchful eyes. What had the nobleman known? What secret had he been willing to die for? Father Brown felt a surge of unease, realizing that the truth, whatever it was, had been carefully guarded, and now it was slipping through his fingers like water through a sieve. As the investigation unfolded, Father Brown found himself caught in a tangled web, a web of lies, betrayal, and an ever-growing list of suspects. The nobleman's widow, a beautiful but cold woman, seemed too distraught to be genuine. She clung to her grief like a shield, but her eyes, those eyes, betrayed her. Then there was the daughter, a silent figure in the background who had been absent the night of her father's death. Father Brown's instincts told him something was off with her, but what? And the servants. Whispers and rumors surrounded them, a constant stream of half-truths that led nowhere. With every step forward, the case seemed to spiral further into chaos. Father Brown's mind raced as he put the pieces together, trying desperately to make sense of the strange puzzle. But nothing fit. Each clue only led to more confusion. The confession had been a lie, but what was the truth? Who had wanted the nobleman dead? And why had he chosen to die in such a mysterious way? The truth, Father Brown realized, was never going to be as simple as it seemed. It wasn't just about the murder. It was about the secrets that had been kept hidden for so long. Secrets so dark that the mere thought of them could shatter lives. As he sat in the study, pondering the pieces of the case, a sudden, unsettling thought struck him. What if the nobleman's death wasn't just a murder? What if it had been a carefully orchestrated plan, a final act of revenge, a way to make sure that no one would ever know the truth? Father Brown felt his heart tighten in his chest. The weight of the mystery bore down on him, and for the first time, he wondered if he would ever find the answers. The truth was elusive, like smoke in the wind, always just out of reach. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone very close, was watching him, waiting for him to uncover something that he was never meant to know. Then came the second bombshell. A visitor arrived at the manor late one night, a man dressed in black, with eyes that seemed to pierce through Father Brown's very soul. He was a stranger, but there was something familiar about him, something that made Father Brown's stomach churn. The man was a messenger, someone who had come to deliver a final piece of the puzzle. But his words were cryptic, like a riddle wrapped in an enigma. The truth, the man said, his voice low and deliberate, is not for the faint of heart. It will destroy everything you think you know. Father Brown was left reeling. The implications were staggering. This was no longer a simple case of murder. It was a matter of survival. Someone wanted this truth buried. Someone would stop at nothing to make sure that it never came to light. As Father Brown made his way back to the church that night, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. But just as he was about to confront the final truth, a figure appeared in the shadows. A woman, her face twisted in desperation. "Father Brown," she pleaded, "you can't uncover it. If you do, we'll all be damned." And just like that, Father Brown realized the horrifying truth. The secret, whatever it was too dangerous to reveal. It had the power to ruin lives, to destroy everything. The final twist of the mystery was this. The truth was not something that could be uncovered. It was something that had to remain buried for the sake of everyone involved. Father Brown paused at the church door, his hand on the handle. He knew the truth, but the price of revealing it was too great. "I know who did it," he said, his voice tinged with sadness, "but the truth will never be told." Chapter 2. The Choirmaster's Deadly Hidden Secret. The room was silent except for the sound of Father Brown's heartbeat, each pulse drumming in his ears as if it were trying to warn him. "He's dead," the voice cracked in disbelief. "The choirmaster is dead." But that was not the most shocking part. The choirmaster had been found face down in the church's ancient organ, his hands still gripping the keys, an eerie symphony of discordant notes filling the air. But why had he died like this? Who could have wanted him dead? Father Brown felt the cold fingers of dread creep up his spine. He had known the choirmaster, had even shared a few quiet conversations about the music that filled their parish with life. But there was something else, something darker. As he stared at the body, all the pieces he thought he understood about the choirmaster's life crumbled. The man they had all trusted, the man who led them in song, was not the man they thought he was. Father Brown stood frozen for a moment, allowing his mind to race. There was no sign of struggle, no marks of violence, and the choirmaster had not been poisoned. Yet there was a strange, unsettling look on the man's face. The cold, lifeless eyes stared back at him, filled with an emotion that felt foreign. Was it fear, regret, or something worse? Father Brown couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a carefully crafted act of murder. He began to scan the room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the surroundings. The organ was ancient, beautiful in its design, and yet it had an air of eeriness about it, as if it had witnessed things it wasn't meant to. It was here that the choirmaster had spent hours, days, weeks perfecting his craft. But what if those hours had been spent hiding something else? What if the music had been a cover for something far more sinister? As Father Brown made his way to the back of the church, he noticed something that caught his attention. A set of strange symbols etched into the floorboards just beneath the organ. Symbols that seemed oddly familiar, but not from any religious texts he had encountered. What could they mean? And why had they been hidden beneath something as sacred as the organ? His mind raced, each thought a tangled web of possibilities, none of them comforting. The investigation revealed a trail of secrets, each more disturbing than the last. Father Brown spoke with the members of the choir, but each person seemed to be hiding something. The soprano, a woman with piercing blue eyes, was overly composed, too composed. The baritone, a younger man with a soft voice, seemed distant, as though the loss of the choirmaster had not affected him the way it should. The alto, a woman with a nervous tic, trembled when Father Brown asked her about the choirmaster's life outside of the choir. She seemed to know far too much, but wasn't willing to speak freely. As the days passed, Father Brown found himself drowning in half-truths. The choirmaster had not been a simple man, and his death was not a simple accident. It became clear that there had been a power struggle within the choir, with the choirmaster at the center of a battle that none of the choir members were willing to admit. But who had the most to gain from his death? And why had the choirmaster's last moments been spent in front of that organ, in such an odd and ritualistic position? The deeper Father Brown dug, the more confusing it became. He learned of the choirmaster's past, a past that he had kept hidden from everyone in the village. It seemed that the man had been involved in something far darker, something so twisted that it threatened to unravel everything Father Brown had thought he knew about the man. There were whispers of forbidden rituals, of debts that could never be repaid, and a mysterious figure that had haunted the choirmaster for years. But where was this figure now? Had they finally come for him? The first big revelation came one cold, foggy morning when Father Brown received an anonymous letter. It was brief but chilling. The choirmaster's secret will die with him. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words carried the weight of someone who knew far more than they let on. Father Brown knew that this letter would change everything. The choirmaster's secret, whatever it was buried deep. But how had the writer known so much? And why had they waited until now to speak? Father Brown began to piece together the fragmented puzzle. The choirmaster had been keeping a journal, one that no one knew about. The journal had been hidden in a drawer beneath his desk, locked away from prying eyes. When Father Brown finally opened it, he found it filled with cryptic entries, some written in a language he couldn't understand. But there was one entry that stood out. It was a date, a time, and a place. Something the choirmaster had planned for years. Something that was meant to be revealed at a specific moment. But what had the choirmaster been preparing for? And why had he left this cryptic message behind? The more Father Brown studied the journal, the more unsettled he became. The choirmaster had known something so dangerous that it could not be allowed to reach the surface. But what? Was the secret tied to the strange symbols in the floorboards? Was there something more beneath the church, beneath the surface of this small village that no one had dared to acknowledge? Then came the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man whose presence had been haunting Father Brown from the start. It was the baritone, the one who had seemed distant and detached. Father Brown confronted him, and the man's eyes filled with an emotion Father Brown had not expected: fear. "I didn't want it to happen this way," the man confessed, his voice trembling. But it was too late. The choirmaster, he knew too much. He was going to expose everything. Father Brown felt his pulse quicken as the truth began to reveal itself in fragments. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to give him the clarity he needed. The baritone, in a moment of panic, ran, disappearing into the mist, leaving Father Brown alone, with more questions than answers. The truth was slipping through his fingers like sand, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he could catch it before it was lost forever. The choirmaster had died because he knew too much. But what was it? What was the secret that had driven someone to murder? The symbols, the journal, the strange rituals. None of it made sense, and yet it all seemed connected. Father Brown couldn't stop. Not now. He couldn't rest until he uncovered every last piece of this twisted puzzle. But with every step he took toward the truth, the danger grew. Someone was determined to keep the secret buried, no matter the cost. And then, as the final twist of the case revealed itself, Father Brown stood in the churchyard, staring into the fog, the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. He knew who had done it, but the truth would never be told. The choirmaster's deadly hidden secret will remain hidden, Father Brown murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The mystery was not just about the murder, it was about the darkness that lurked in the very heart of their community. And now, it was a darkness that would never be revealed. Chapter 3. Father Brown unravels. A sinister plot. It was in the dead of night, with the sound of footsteps echoing in the empty streets, that Father Brown received the letter. The ink was still fresh, as if it had been hastily written only moments before. But it was the contents of the letter that made his blood run cold. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," it read. "This isn't just a crime. This is the beginning of something far darker. If you uncover the truth, everything will burn." Father Brown's fingers tightened around the paper, his mind racing. He had been investigating a string of strange events, small coincidences that were beginning to paint a far more sinister picture. But now, this letter, this warning, what did it mean? What was happening in this quiet village, beneath its peaceful exterior? And who was behind it all? The mystery began with a simple murder, or so it seemed. A prominent local businessman, Mr. Edgar Sinclair, had been found dead in his study. No signs of forced entry, no apparent struggle. The man had simply been sitting at his desk when death claimed him. There was a glass of wine beside him, the glass perfectly intact, the wine untouched. Everything about the scene screamed natural causes, except for one thing: the peculiar, almost cryptic note found in Sinclair's hand. "It's too late. The plan is already in motion." Father Brown's instincts told him there was more to this than met the eye. But as he began digging deeper into Sinclair's life, he found nothing unusual. The man had been wealthy, respected, but no enemies, at least not that anyone could point to. The business he ran was reputable, his family well-connected. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. Then came the strange events that followed. A string of unexplained accidents, rumors of people disappearing in the middle of the night, and whispers of a group operating in the shadows. Father Brown couldn't shake the feeling that these incidents were all linked, connected by something much larger than any one individual. And as he began speaking with the townspeople, his suspicions were confirmed. No one was talking about it, but they all knew something was wrong. Something had been set in motion, and no one was safe. The deeper Father Brown delved into the investigation, the more he realized that the death of Edgar Sinclair was just the beginning. He unearthed connections to a secret society, a group operating in the town for years, pulling strings from the shadows. No one had ever suspected their existence, until now. This was not a simple case of murder. This was a well-planned, highly organized operation, and Father Brown was only scratching the surface. The first big revelation came when Father Brown met with the local constable, Inspector Grant. The inspector had been working on the case for days, but seemed unusually tight-lipped. "There's something you should know, Father," Grant said, his voice low, filled with a hint of fear. "This isn't just about Sinclair. There's a pattern to these deaths, a connection we've overlooked. All of them, every single one, were connected to the opening of a particular vault in the town's old bank. But the vault is sealed, locked away. No one can open it without the proper key, and no one knows where that key is." Father Brown's mind raced. The vault, the key, what could it all mean? Was this what the letter had been referring to? He knew that the vault's contents must be important, but what was inside, that would make people kill for it. As Father Brown continued his investigation, he discovered something that completely turned the case upside down. He found a series of meetings, gatherings, secret messages passed in plain sight, all pointing toward a singular goal: control. This mysterious group was orchestrating something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. They were pulling the strings, manipulating people, all while hiding behind the facade of the town's respectable citizens. And then came the shock that rocked Father Brown to his core. The group behind it all, the people responsible for Sinclair's death, the disappearances, The accidents were the town's most prominent families. They had been using their wealth and influence to cover their tracks, manipulating the system to achieve their own agenda. They had been working in plain sight, hiding in the open, deceiving everyone. The truth was more twisted than Father Brown could have ever imagined. But just as Father Brown thought he had uncovered the truth, another twist awaited him. He discovered that one of the people closest to him, someone he had trusted, was involved in the conspiracy. It was a revelation that shook him to his very core. How could he have been so blind? How could he have missed the signs? He thought he knew everyone, but now it seemed he didn't know anyone at all. Father Brown now faced a choice: expose the truth, risk everything to bring down this dangerous group, or walk away, allowing the darkness to continue. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous the situation became. People close to him were turning up dead, and Father Brown could feel the walls closing in. Whoever was behind this knew that he was getting too close, and they would stop at nothing to silence him. In the dead of night, as Father Brown sat alone in his study, the full weight of the situation crashed down on him. He had uncovered more than he had bargained, for the conspiracy was bigger than he had ever thought, and it was connected to the very heart of the town. There was no turning back now. Every step he took toward the truth only revealed more lies, more deception, more danger. It was a web he couldn't escape. Then came the final chilling piece of the puzzle. A visit from the one person Father Brown had least expected. The figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured, but their voice unmistakable. "You don't know what you're up against, Father. If you continue, there will be consequences. People will die. More people will die." It was a warning, but it came too late. Father Brown was already too far in, and the truth, as he now understood, was far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The final twist came as Father Brown stood at the doorstep of the bank, facing the sealed vault. The truth, he now realized, was hidden within those walls, and he had to uncover it before it was lost forever. But as he reached for the vault's key, someone struck from behind, leaving Father Brown sprawled on the cold stone floor. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the glint of the key, slipping from his hand and disappearing into the shadows. When Father Brown awoke, the world had changed. The vault had been opened, but the truth it contained was buried deeper than ever. He knew who had done it. He knew who had masterminded the entire plot. But the truth, he could never tell. "I know who did it," Father Brown whispered to himself, staring at the sealed vault. "But the truth will never be told." The conspiracy was too vast, too dangerous, and too many lives were at stake. Father Brown's silence would be the only way to protect the town, at least for now. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still lurking, waiting to rise again. Chapter 4. The Girl Who Knew Too Much. The girl stood in the middle of the dimly lit street, her eyes wide, filled with the kind of fear that made every instinct in Father Brown's gut twist in warning. She was barely more than a child, no older than 16, and yet her face had the weight of someone who had lived a lifetime in shadows. In her hands, she clutched a crumpled letter, the edges stained with something dark, something ominous. The words she whispered to Father Brown made his blood run cold. "I know who did it. I know everything." It was the beginning of a mystery unlike any Father Brown had encountered before. The case was no simple crime. It was a tangled web of secrets deceit, and hidden truths that threatened to consume everything in its path. And at the center of it all was this girl, this terrified, trembling girl, who knew something too dangerous to be known. Father Brown tried to calm her, urging her to speak, to tell him everything. But she couldn't. Her words faltered, as if the truth itself was choking her. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They'll come for me. They'll kill me if they find out I've told you." The mystery began with the discovery of a body. A local man, Thomas Mallory, found dead in his home under strange circumstances. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of what had caused his death. Just an empty room, a man lying lifeless in a chair, and a single page of paper on the floor with a single sentence written on it: "She knows too much." It wasn't long before Father Brown learned that Mallory wasn't just any man. He was a part of something bigger, something darker. He had been involved with a group that operated in the shadows, a group whose influence reached far beyond the town. Father Brown knew that if Mallory had been killed, it wasn't because of some petty crime, it was because he knew something he shouldn't have known. But as Father Brown began to dig deeper, he realized that the girl, the one who claimed to know everything, was somehow tied to Mallory's death. She had seen things, she had overheard things, and now she was running for her life. The girl, named Sarah, had been living in the town's orphanage, but no one knew much about her past. She had no family, no history, just a dark, secretive presence that made people uneasy. And yet now, she was the key to everything. As Father Brown questioned her, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Sarah had been a witness too, something far more sinister than anyone had realized. She had seen Mallory meet with someone the night before his death, a shadowy figure who had whispered about plans to silence her. But what had she seen? What had Mallory known that could be worth killing for? The more Sarah spoke, the more confused Father Brown became. Her words were fragmented, disconnected. But there was one thing she was certain of. It's not just one person. It's everyone. They've all been lying. They're all connected. The mystery took an even darker turn when Father Brown learned of the letters. Sarah had found them hidden in Mallory's house, a series of correspondence that painted a picture of something far more elaborate than a simple conspiracy. The letters spoke of a powerful network, one that stretched across the entire town and possibly beyond. People in positions of power, politicians, business owners, even law enforcement, were all involved. But what was their goal? What was this group trying to achieve? As Father Brown continued to piece together the puzzle, he stumbled upon a secret meeting, a gathering of some of the town's most influential figures. They were discussing plans, making decisions, and in the corner of the room, there was Sarah, listening in, overhearing everything. But the moment they realized she was there, they knew she had to be silenced. And that was when they made their move, sending Mallory to warn her, and eventually taking him out when he failed. But Sarah hadn't just overheard their conversation. She had seen something so damning that it could destroy everything this group had built. And now they would stop at nothing to make sure she never spoke again. Father Brown's heart pounded as he realized the full extent of the conspiracy. This wasn't just about power. It was about control, about manipulating the lives of everyone in the town. And at the center of it all was the girl who knew too much, the girl who had heard too much, but who was she really? Why had she been chosen as the key to everything? Then came the first big revelation. The letters Sarah had found were not just correspondence between conspirators. They were a list of names, all marked for death. Mallory had been on that list, and so had Sarah. But now it was clear that she wasn't the only one being targeted. Father Brown realized that this plot wasn't just about keeping Sarah silent. It was about eliminating anyone who could expose the truth. As he dug deeper, Father Brown discovered something that shattered everything he thought he knew. The conspiracy wasn't just local, it was global. The group had ties to powerful organizations, and the town was just a small piece of a much larger plan. And now the people behind it were desperate to find Sarah before she could reveal what she knew. But where would they go? Who could they trust? The web was far too tangled for any one person to untangle alone. The situation grew more dangerous with every passing moment. As Father Brown struggled to keep Sarah safe, he began to feel the weight of the conspiracy closing in around him. His every move was being watched, every word scrutinized. And as he confronted the town's most influential figures, he realized that no one was truly on his side, not even the law. Everyone had been bought, manipulated, controlled. And now, Father Brown had to make a choice: expose the conspiracy and risk his life, or protect the girl who knew too much and risk losing everything. The suspense built to a boiling point as Father Brown made a final, desperate move. He found himself face to face with the mastermind behind it all, the one who had orchestrated the plot, who had pulled the strings from the shadows. It was someone Father Brown had never suspected, someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The revelation rocked him to his core, and as the truth unraveled before him, he realized that there was no way to stop what was already in motion. As the final twist came crashing down, Father Brown's voice trembled with the weight of the truth. "I know who did it," he said, his eyes locking onto the mastermind, "but the truth will never be told. The girl, Sarah, had been a pawn in a much larger game, and now, with everything exposed, there was no turning back. But the truth was more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. Father Brown had done his best, but in the end, the price of revealing the truth was far too high. Some secrets were never meant to be uncovered, and now it was too late for anyone to escape the consequences. Chapter 5. Father Brown discovers the dark past. Father Brown froze as the door creaked open. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, but enough to make his pulse quicken. And then he saw it. The letter, torn at the edges, its contents smudged, but unmistakable. It was addressed to him. He had been expecting something, but not this. The words on the page hit him like a hammer to the chest. "If you dig any deeper, you'll regret it. The truth isn't just dangerous, it's deadly." The room around him seemed to blur as the weight of those words sank in. His eyes flickered over the paper again, the warning glaring back at him. But the deeper Father Brown looked into the case he had been investigating, the more he realized this was no ordinary mystery. What started as a simple inquiry into a series of strange deaths had now unearthed something so dark, so twisted, that Father Brown wasn't sure he could stop. He wasn't even sure he wanted to. Father Brown had been chasing shadows for weeks now, piecing together a story that seemed to slip further from his grasp the more he learned. It all began with a string of disappearances, people vanishing without a trace, as though they had been swallowed by the earth itself. At first, it seemed like a series of unrelated events, but as the bodies began to pile up, Father Brown's instincts told him there was something more at play. The police were stumped and the townspeople remained tight-lipped, afraid, or too intimidated to speak. But one thing was clear. Whoever was behind this had power. Power that stretched deeper than anyone had realized. And then Father Brown stumbled upon an old, forgotten truth. Something buried in the town's history, hidden in plain sight, like a dark undercurrent running through the veins of the village. The answer had been there all along, but it was too dangerous to unearth. For decades, this secret had been locked away, and now it was threatening to break free. The case became personal. Father Brown had learned that the people involved weren't just strangers. They were connected to him. People he knew, people he trusted, people whose lives seemed innocent and unremarkable. But as he dug deeper, the truth began to unravel, revealing a twisted tapestry of betrayal, power, and hidden horrors. The first clue came from an old photograph, a faded image of a group of men standing together, their faces marked with pride, but something darker lurking beneath the surface. Father Brown had recognized one of the faces instantly, his own great-grandfather, a man who had been a hero in the town's eyes. But as he studied the photograph, another name caught his eye: the mayor, a man who had been serving the town for decades, a man of unwavering reputation and control. Why had he been so closely involved with Father Brown's family all those years ago? The photograph led Father Brown to a long-forgotten journal, a relic from his great-grandfather's time. As he read through the worn pages, he uncovered something shocking: a secret society formed under the guise of community service, but whose true goal was to amass control, manipulate, and eliminate anyone who threatened their power. This was no ordinary town. It was a place built on lies, and those who held the keys were willing to do anything to protect them. And they had done everything to ensure that no one would ever discover the truth. As Father Brown continued to piece together the puzzle, he realized that the deaths, the disappearances, the strange occurrences, they were all part of a plan set in motion decades ago, orchestrated by the very people he had trusted, including his own family. His great-grandfather had been one of the key players in this dark game, and now Father Brown was tangled in the web they had spun. The truth, however, was not something Father Brown could easily uncover. Each revelation only led to more questions. The people involved were too powerful, too ingrained in the fabric of the town. They had covered their tracks for so long, and the closer Father Brown got to the heart of the conspiracy, the more dangerous it became. People who had once been his allies now turned against him, closing ranks, whispering in the shadows. Then came the first major breakthrough: a hidden letter. It was addressed to Father Brown's great-grandfather from the mayor, a letter that spoke of arrangements, of finalizing the plan. The words were chilling, the implications even more so. It seemed that the mayor had known what Father Brown's great-grandfather was involved in, and they had both been playing a game of manipulation, using others as pawns to secure their own power. The letter ended with a cryptic warning: "You know what happens if the truth gets out. We can't let that happen." Father Brown was left reeling. What had they done? What had they uncovered all those years ago that they had worked so hard to hide? He couldn't stop now. He had to know the truth, no matter how dangerous it became. The stakes were raised further when Father Brown received another visit. This time, it wasn't just the familiar faces of the townspeople. It was someone from his past, a man he had known since childhood, a man who had always been seen as a pillar of the community. But now, the man's face was different. His eyes were filled with desperation, fear, and something darker, more sinister. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "They've been watching you. You're getting too close." The man's warning only fueled Father Brown's determination. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized that his family's involvement in this twisted conspiracy was far deeper than he had ever imagined. His great-grandfather had not just been a bystander, he had been the architect, and the mayor, the very man who had been overseeing the town's affairs for so long, had been pulling the strings all along. As Father Brown uncovered more, he began to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy. The society wasn't just about controlling the town, it was about controlling the entire region. Powerful families, politicians, business owners, all of them had been in on it, all of them complicit in the dark plan that had been set in motion long ago. The deaths weren't random. They were orchestrated, meant to eliminate those who posed a threat to their power. And now, Father Brown had become a target. The final piece of the puzzle came when Father Brown uncovered the chilling truth about the town's founding. The town had been built on blood, on the backs of the innocent, and the people who had sacrificed their lives were nothing more than pawns in a greater game. The truth was far darker than Father Brown had ever anticipated, and now it seemed there was no way out. He was caught in a web of lies that went back generations, a web that he couldn't escape from, no matter how hard he tried. In the final moments, Father Brown stood at the edge of the town's old church, staring into the night. The truth was in front of him, but it was too dangerous to reveal. The people involved were powerful, and the consequences of exposing them would be catastrophic. "I know who did it," Father Brown whispered to himself, his voice thick with the weight of the revelation. But the truth will never be told. The dark past had been uncovered, but Father Brown realized that some secrets were better left buried, no matter the cost. As the town slept, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath its surface, Father Brown turned away, the truth weighing heavily on his heart. Chapter 6. A Fatal Mistake. Father Brown exposes. The body was still warm when Father Brown entered the room. The door creaked behind him as he stepped over the threshold, his heart racing. The man lying in front of him, pale and motionless, had been a well-respected figure, someone whose reputation had been built on trust and integrity. Yet here he was, dead on the floor, with a single clue that would unravel everything. A fatal mistake, one that no one could have anticipated. One that Father Brown had to figure out before the killer got away with it. This wasn't just another case of murder. This wasn't some crime of passion or random violence. No, this was something far more insidious, far more calculated. The man lying dead on the floor was no ordinary victim, and the circumstances surrounding his death were so twisted, so full of deceit, that Father Brown knew he was standing on the edge of a revelation that could change everything. The first signs of trouble had appeared when Father Brown was summoned to the estate of Charles Bracken, a local businessman with a reputation for being untouchable. Bracken had been found dead in his study, the room locked from the inside. The police had been stumped from the beginning, unable to make sense of the scene. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. And yet, Bracken had been murdered. What had happened in that room? At first, Father Brown assumed it was a simple case of an accidental death, or even a natural one. But as he examined the body more closely, something didn't sit right. The look on Bracken's face was one of sheer terror, as though he had known something or someone was coming for him. There was no way it was an accident. The fear in his expression was all too real. The mystery deepened when Father Brown discovered a note hidden in Bracken's desk drawer. It was simple, short, but incredibly ominous. "You've made a fatal mistake. It's too late to stop it now." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Who had left this note? And why did it seem as though Bracken had been warned before his death? As Father Brown delved further into Bracken's life, he realized that the man had been involved in something much darker than anyone had imagined. His business dealings, though legal on the surface, were laced with corruption, greed, and manipulation. Bracken had been playing a dangerous game, making enemies in the most unexpected places. But was it one of those enemies who had killed him, or was the cause of his death more personal, something tied to the choices he had made in his own life? Father Brown's investigation began to take him down a path that led to the heart of Bracken's past, a past that was filled with betrayal, secrets, and a dangerous web of lies. The more he learned, the more Father Brown realized that Bracken's death wasn't just a random act of violence. It was the culmination of years of mistakes, each one building upon the last, until it finally broke everything apart. The first big revelation came when Father Brown uncovered a series of financial records that tied Bracken to an underground network of shady business deals. These deals, though seemingly innocuous, had far-reaching consequences. They involved people in high places, politicians, judges, and businessmen who were all part of a hidden world where money and power ruled above everything else. Bracken had been a part of this world, and he had made his fair share of enemies along the way. But what really shocked Father Brown was the connection he found between Bracken and someone he had known personally, a man he had trusted, a man who had been a mentor to him in his early days as a priest. This man, who had always appeared above reproach, was now at the center of everything. The man's involvement in Bracken's dealings was undeniable, and yet Father Brown couldn't believe it. How had he missed the signs? How had this man managed to hide his true nature for so long? As Father Brown continued to dig deeper, the darkness surrounding Bracken's death only grew. He began to unravel a web of deceit that stretched back years, leading to a single fatal mistake. Bracken had crossed a line. He had betrayed the wrong person, made the wrong deal. And now, the consequences were coming for him. The people he had wronged were not going to let him walk away unscathed. And as Father Brown pieced together the evidence, he realized that the people who had orchestrated Bracken's death weren't just trying to eliminate him. They were trying to send a message. The suspense continued to build as Father Brown uncovered more disturbing truths about the town's most powerful figures. The lines between right and wrong, good and evil, were becoming increasingly blurred. The more Father Brown uncovered, the more it became clear that the entire town was built on lies. Lies that had been carefully crafted and maintained for years. The people in charge had been manipulating everyone, hiding their true intentions behind a veil of respectability. But now, their darkest secrets were coming to light, and it was clear that they would stop at nothing to protect themselves. And then came the moment that left Father Brown reeling, a shocking piece of information that deepened the mystery to an almost incomprehensible level. He discovered that the key to Bracken's death was not just the people he had betrayed, it was the man who had warned him, the man who had left the note. It was someone Father Brown had never suspected, someone he had known for years, someone who had been right under his nose the entire time. The truth hit Father Brown like a tidal wave. This man, this person he had trusted, had been orchestrating everything from the beginning. They had used Bracken as a pawn, setting him up to make the fatal mistake that would seal his fate. And they had done it all for one reason: control. They had used Bracken's arrogance, his greed, his need for power against him, knowing that he would make the wrong choices. And in the end, they had manipulated everything to their advantage. As Father Brown stood in the darkened room, piecing together the final clues, he realized that he was no longer in control of the situation. He had been pulled into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The people involved were powerful, ruthless, and willing to do anything to protect their secrets. The stakes were higher than ever, and Father Brown had no choice but to continue his investigation, no matter how dangerous it became. The cliffhanger came when Father Brown, standing at the threshold of the truth, realized that he had uncovered more than just a murder. He had uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything he had ever expected. And the final twist, one that would change everything, came when Father Brown realized that the killer was not just someone who had been seeking revenge. No, the killer was someone who had been trying to control the narrative from the very beginning. Someone who had been playing everyone for fools. "I know who did it," Father Brown said, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "But the truth will never be told." With those words, Father Brown left the room, knowing that some secrets were too dangerous to reveal. The darkness that had been uncovered would remain buried, hidden from the world, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The conspiracy had won, but at what cost? Chapter 7. The Choirmaster's Secret That Killed Her. The choir had been singing when it happened, the moment that would change everything. Father Brown was standing at the back of the church, listening to the harmonies that filled the air with a sense of peace, a sense of grace. But it was the final note, the one that lingered, that struck Father Brown to his core. The choirmaster's face went pale, his hands trembling as he collapsed in front of the congregation, his body racked with spasms. Within minutes, he was dead. But it wasn't just the sudden death that stunned everyone. It was the truth Father Brown uncovered that followed. A secret so dark, it had the power to destroy everything. Father Brown hadn't known what to expect when he was called to investigate the choirmaster's death, but he had never imagined this. The choirmaster, a man respected for his leadership, his deep knowledge of music, and his calm demeanor, had seemed invincible. The church had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could do no wrong. But now, with him dead on the floor, Father Brown realized that nothing about this death was accidental. It wasn't a natural death, it was murder. And the choirmaster had been the target of something much more sinister. As Father Brown examined the scene, he noticed something peculiar. A sheet of music, carefully folded and placed on the edge of the organ, seemed out of place. It wasn't a hymn or a sacred piece. It was something darker. Father Brown could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as he carefully unfolded the sheet. Written in elegant script were strange symbols, ones that didn't belong in the world of church music. The words on the sheet weren't in Latin or any language he could recognize, but they were unmistakably tied to something older, something darker. The choirmaster had been hiding something that had finally caught up with him. Father Brown's mind raced. Who would want to kill the choirmaster, and why? The first question was the most difficult to answer. The choirmaster had no known enemies. He was loved by the community, respected by everyone who knew him. He had no known vices, no dark dealings that could have led to his untimely death, or so it seemed. But Father Brown wasn't fooled. The choirmaster's secret was out there, buried deep beneath the surface, and it was only a matter of time before it would be unearthed. He began speaking to the members of the choir, carefully questioning each one. There was a sense of unease in the air, a feeling that something was amiss, but no one wanted to speak. The soprano was the first to crack, her voice shaking as she told Father Brown about the strange behavior of the choirmaster in the days leading up to his death. He had been acting erratically, spending more time in the church after hours, scribbling notes furiously in a notebook. He had become withdrawn, isolated from the rest of the choir, and yet no one knew why. As Father Brown spoke to more members of the choir, a pattern began to emerge. The choirmaster had been hiding something from them all. But what was it? Why had he changed so suddenly? And what had caused his death? The first big revelation came when Father Brown spoke to the alto, a woman who had been the choirmaster's closest confidant. She had known him for years, but she had never seen him like this. She revealed that the choirmaster had received a mysterious letter just days before his death. The letter had been sealed with no return address and had been written in the same strange handwriting as the sheet of music Father Brown had found. The choirmaster had been shaken when he read it, his hands trembling as he passed it to her. "They know," he had said, his voice hoarse. "They've finally found me." But who were they? And what had the choirmaster been hiding from everyone? The more Father Brown learned, the more he realized that the choirmaster had been running from something. But what was it? And why had he felt the need to keep it hidden for so long? As Father Brown continued his investigation, he stumbled upon a series of journals hidden in the choirmaster's private study. These journals, written in a language he couldn't quite understand, were filled with disturbing entries. The choirmaster had been obsessed with something. Each journal entry spoke of ancient rituals, of promises made to shadowy figures, and of a pact that had been forged long ago. The choirmaster had been involved in something far darker than anyone had realized, a secret society, one that operated in the shadows, using music as a way to control people and events. The more Father Brown read, the more he understood. The choirmaster had not just been a man of faith, he had been a man caught between two worlds. He had been involved with a group that believed in the power of ancient rituals, rituals that had been passed down for generations. These rituals, though they appeared harmless on the surface, were tied to something far more sinister. The choirmaster had been trying to leave the group, to escape the grip it had on him, but it was too late. The group had found him, and they had made him pay for trying to escape. As Father Brown delved deeper into the choirmaster's past, he began to unravel a horrifying truth. The choirmaster had been part of a dark conspiracy that had begun long before his time. The group he had been involved with had been using music to manipulate and control people, to bend them to their will. The choirmaster had been a key player in this group, using his position to gather information, to control the people around him, all while hiding behind the mask of a respected choir leader. But now the group had caught up with him, and they had made him pay the ultimate price for his betrayal. The first big revelation had been disturbing, but the second was even more shocking. Father Brown learned that the group the choirmaster had been involved with wasn't just a local cult. It was a global organization, one that had its roots in the most powerful and influential institutions in the world. The choirmaster had been a pawn in a much larger game, one that spanned continents and centuries. The music, the rituals, the strange symbols, it was all part of a plan to control the very fabric of society itself. And now, the choirmaster had paid for his role in that plan with his life. But the twists didn't end there. Father Brown uncovered the truth about the choirmaster's relationship with the soprano, the woman who had been closest to him. She had known about the group, and she had been part of it too. But she had been playing both sides, using her position in the choir to gather information for the group while pretending to be a devout, innocent member of the church. She had known about the choirmaster's betrayal, and she had been complicit in his death. But why? What had driven her to kill him? The final shocking revelation came when Father Brown uncovered the true extent of the choirmaster's secret. The group wasn't just about power, it was about control. The choirmaster had been trying to break free from the group, to expose them for the monsters they were, but he had made a fatal mistake. In his attempt to escape, he had brought down the wrath of the very people he had once been loyal to, and in the end, it was his death that had sealed the fate of everyone involved. Father Brown stood over the choirmaster's grave, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth. The choirmaster had been a man of contradictions, a man caught between two worlds, trying to escape the darkness that had consumed him. But in the end, he had made a fatal mistake, a mistake that had cost him his life and would forever haunt the town. "I know who did it," Father Brown whispered to himself, his voice heavy with sorrow, "but the truth will never be told." The darkness had won, and there was nothing Father Brown could do to stop it. Chapter 8. Father Brown's silent witness speaks. The room was silent, save for the soft rhythmic ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. Father Brown stood at the window, gazing out at the street below, his thoughts heavy, his heart burdened by the enormity of the case before him. The sudden knock at the door broke the silence, and when he opened it, a figure stood in the doorway, a person he had never expected to see, yet somehow it all made sense. "Father, I have something to say," the figure said, voice shaking. "I know who killed him." Father Brown felt the weight of the words settle on him like a 1,000-pound stone. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that could unravel everything. But as the figure stepped inside, a cold breeze seemed to follow, and Father Brown felt a shiver run down his spine. There was more to this than just a confession. There was something darker at play, something that had been hidden for far too long. The case had begun with the death of a well-respected local man, Robert Hale. He had been a figure of integrity, beloved by the community, and yet someone had killed him. But the strange thing was, there was no clear motive, no obvious suspects, no evidence, only whispers in the shadows, murmurs that pointed to something far deeper than a simple murder. Father Brown had spent days piecing together the fragments of the case, but each lead had brought him further away from the truth, deeper into a maze of lies and deceit. The first twist in the case had come when Father Brown learned about Hale's past. He had been a quiet man, content with his life as a local shopkeeper. But there were rumors about his involvement with the town's elite. People spoke of strange dealings, late-night meetings, and whispered conversations. Father Brown's instincts told him there was more to Hale's life than what was visible on the surface. But what could it be? And how had it led to his death? As Father Brown investigated further, he began to uncover the darkest secrets of Hale's life. Hale had been keeping a journal, an old weathered book filled with cryptic entries, each more disturbing than the last. The journal spoke of debts, of promises made to the wrong people, and of a web of corruption that reached the highest levels of the town's power. Hale had known too much, and he had been silenced. But by whom? And why? The breakthrough came when Father Brown discovered a letter, tucked away in Hale's study, hidden beneath a pile of old papers. The letter was addressed to someone simply marked as R. It was a terse, urgent message. You have no idea what you've done. I will never forgive you for this. The truth will come out, no matter how many lives it costs. The letter was unsigned, but its implications were clear. Hale had been involved in something far more dangerous than anyone had known, and now someone wanted him dead. Father Brown's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the letter. Who was R? What had Hale done that was so unforgivable? And why had this person killed him? To keep the truth hidden? As he pondered these questions, the door had opened, and the figure, his silent witness, had entered, delivering the shocking words that would set everything into motion. The figure standing before Father Brown was not a stranger. It was Amelia, Hale's estranged daughter. She had left the town years ago, distancing herself from her father after a bitter disagreement. But now she had returned, and she had come to reveal the truth. "Father," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I know who killed him. It wasn't just some random murderer. It was someone from our past, someone we never suspected." Father Brown's pulse quickened as he listened intently. Amelia had been living in London for years, far away from the town and from her father. She hadn't known about the secrets he had been keeping, the darkness he had been hiding. But now she had come back with a piece of the puzzle, a piece that would change everything. Amelia revealed that her father had been involved with a secret group, an underground network of people who operated in the shadows, manipulating events for their own gain. Hale had been one of the founding members, and he had used his position as a respected member of the community to cover up their dealings. But something had gone wrong. Hale had started to question their methods, their motives, and that was when he became a liability. The people in the group had known that Hale's conscience was starting to get the better of him. They couldn't afford to let him speak out, to expose the truth. So they had made a choice. They had killed him, but not in a way that would immediately raise suspicion. No, they had staged his death to look like an accident, a heart attack. But the truth was far more sinister. The first big reveal came when Amelia confessed something that Father Brown could hardly believe. Hale's death had been orchestrated by someone close to him, someone he had trusted, someone who had been working alongside him in the group. The killer was not a stranger, but a member of the very network Hale had once been part of. It was someone who knew Hale's weaknesses, his fears, and how to manipulate him. The killer had used their connection with Hale to strike when he was most vulnerable, to silence him for good. But that wasn't all. Amelia revealed that Hale had been trying to leave the group. He had been planning to expose them, to reveal their secrets to the world. He had been gathering evidence, preparing to bring down the entire network. But it was too late. The group had found out, and they had taken action before Hale could do any more damage. They had murdered him to protect their empire, to keep their dark dealings hidden from the public eye. Father Brown's mind reeled with the implications. The group was powerful, its influence stretching far beyond the town. They had been operating for years, manipulating events, controlling people, and hiding their true intentions behind a veil of respectability. And now, the truth was beginning to surface. But who could Father Brown trust? Who was behind the network? And how could he stop them before they struck again? As Father Brown confronted Amelia with the information he had uncovered, the tension in the room reached a breaking point. But just as Father Brown was about to ask her more questions, a sudden noise interrupted them. The door burst open, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man Father Brown recognized instantly. It was Robert Hale, the brother of the dead man. He had been missing for days, presumed dead, but here he was, standing before them, his face twisted with anger. "Father Brown," Robert said, his voice low and threatening. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think you've uncovered all the secrets. But you're wrong. You don't know the half of it." Father Brown's heart raced as he realized that the truth was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Robert Hale had been part of the group, and now he was here to stop Father Brown from exposing the truth. But why? What was he trying to protect? And how far would he go to keep the network's secrets hidden? The cliffhanger came when Robert pulled out a gun, aiming it directly at Father Brown. "You've uncovered too much," he said, his eyes filled with cold determination. "It's time for you to stop asking questions." Father Brown's heart raced as he realized that he was standing at the edge of a precipice. The truth was out there, but the cost of revealing it was higher than he had ever imagined. Would he survive this confrontation? Would the truth be exposed, or would it be buried forever? The last words Father Brown spoke were chilling. "I know who did it," he said, his voice steady despite the danger. "But the truth will never be told." As the gun lowered, the room fell silent. The secrets were out, but at what cost? Father Brown didn't know if he would live to see the truth revealed, but one thing was certain: the darkness had won, and now it would remain hidden forever. Chapter 9: The Hidden Clue That Cracked Everything. Father Brown stood over the body, his breath catching in his throat as the realization hit him like a freight train. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. This wasn't just another death. This was the culmination of everything he had feared. There, lying in front of him, was the key to the entire mystery, an innocent detail, a single clue that no one had thought to question. But now it had cracked open the entire case, and with it, the truth that no one was prepared for. The case had begun simply enough, with a string of strange occurrences, a murder here, a disappearance there, but no clear connection between them. The town had been gripped by fear, but no one knew where to turn. The police were at a standstill. The leads dried up, and the tension in the air was palpable. But Father Brown had always known that things weren't what they seemed. The pieces didn't fit, and something dark, was hiding just beneath the surface. He had spent weeks digging into the lives of the victims, talking to witnesses, retracing every step, every conversation. But it wasn't until this moment, standing over a body in a cold, dimly lit room, that he understood. This wasn't a series of unrelated incidents. No, someone had been pulling the strings all along, orchestrating a complex game, one that no one had even realized was being played. And now, with this one small, seemingly insignificant detail, everything was about to unravel. Father Brown's mind raced. He had spent so much time looking at the bigger picture, trying to connect the dots, that he had overlooked the smallest clue, the one that would break the case wide open. There, on the floor next to the body, was a torn piece of paper, no larger than the palm of his hand. The edges were frayed, as if it had been torn out of a larger document in a hurry. It was just a scrap, but it was the first thing that made sense in this entire mess. The paper was covered in scribbled numbers and letters, none of which seemed to make any sense at first glance. Father Brown felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized the pattern. This was not just random writing. This was code. But what kind of code? And more importantly, who had left it there? Had the victim left this clue in a final, desperate attempt to tell the truth? Or had someone placed it to lead Father Brown in the wrong direction? The mystery grew even more complicated when Father Brown traced the numbers to an old ledger hidden in the town's archives. The ledger had been collecting dust for years, forgotten by all but the most dedicated of record keepers. But Father Brown, with his sharp eye and relentless determination, had found it. The ledger held the names of local families, merchants, and prominent figures, all listed beside numbers and codes that made no sense. But the name that stood out was one Father Brown had not expected to see: the mayor. The first big reveal came when Father Brown uncovered a document tucked away behind the ledger, a letter signed by the mayor himself. The letter was brief, but its implications were staggering. It spoke of a final arrangement, of a plan that must come to fruition. Father Brown's stomach churned as he realized that the mayor had been involved in something far darker than anyone had ever suspected. The letter made it clear. The mayor wasn't just a passive player in these events. He had been orchestrating everything from the shadows, using his position of power to manipulate the town and its people for his own gain. But there was more. The clue Father Brown had uncovered, the torn piece of paper, wasn't just a random detail. It was a key to understanding the mayor's plan. The numbers on the paper matched the entries in the ledger, but they weren't just records. They were codes, a way for the mayor to track his progress and the people he had used to execute his plan. The ledger held the names of those who had been manipulated, those who had been blackmailed or forced to do the mayor's bidding. Father Brown's heart raced as he realized that the conspiracy was much larger than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about a few deaths. It was about control, about using the town and its people as pawns in a twisted game of power. The mayor had been manipulating everyone, and no one had even known. Father Brown had to stop him before it was too late. But the deeper he dug, the more dangerous the situation became. As Father Brown confronted the mayor, a chilling thought crossed his mind. Was this just the beginning? What else had the mayor hidden? What other secrets lay buried beneath the surface of this town? The mayor's calm demeanor was deceptive, masking the darkness that lay beneath. But Father Brown had uncovered enough to know that he couldn't trust anyone. Not anymore. The lines between right and wrong, good and evil, had become blurred, and the only thing that was clear was that Father Brown had to keep pushing forward no matter the cost. The suspense reached a boiling point as Father Brown confronted the mayor in his office. The mayor, sitting behind his desk with a smug smile, didn't seem worried. He knew that Father Brown had uncovered some of his secrets, but he didn't seem to care. "You're too late," the mayor said, his voice cold and calculating. "Everything has already been set in motion. The town is mine, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Father Brown's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the mayor's words. What did he mean by "everything has already been set in motion"? Was there something bigger happening that Father Brown hadn't yet uncovered? The mayor's smirk deepened as he leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. You think you've won, Father Brown? You think you've figured it all out? But there's something you're missing. Something that will change everything. Just as Father Brown was about to press the mayor for more answers, the door burst open. A figure stepped into the room. Someone Father Brown had not expected to see. It was one of the town's most respected figures, a man who had been working closely with the mayor for years. But now, as Father Brown saw the look in his eyes, he knew that this man was not who he seemed. "You've been part of this all along, haven't you?" Father Brown said, his voice steady despite the shock. "You've been working with the mayor. You've been helping him carry out this plan." The man nodded, his face grim. "I had no choice," he said. "It's too late now. Everything is set in motion, and there's no stopping it." His words echoed in Father Brown's ears, each one more chilling than the last. The first twist came when Father Brown realized that the man who had been working with the mayor wasn't just a bystander. He had been the one pulling the strings all along. The mayor was just a puppet, a tool to further the man's own agenda. Father Brown's eyes widened as the truth hit him. The real mastermind behind the conspiracy was someone far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The cliffhanger came when Father Brown was handed another letter, this one sealed and addressed to him. The letter was short, but its words were damning. "You've uncovered the truth, Father Brown, but you're too late. The final act has begun, and you won't live to see the end." The room seemed to close in around Father Brown as he realized that the stakes were higher than ever. The mayor's plan, the conspiracy that had been years in the making, was reaching its climax, and now Father Brown was caught in the middle, unable to stop it. Father Brown's voice was filled with quiet resolve as he said the final words that would haunt him forever. "I know who did it," he whispered, "but the truth will never be told." The door slammed shut behind him as he walked away, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The conspiracy had been exposed, but the cost had been too great. The truth would remain hidden, buried in the shadows, and Father Brown was left to wonder, would the town ever be the same again, or was it too far gone to be saved? Chapter 10. The Murder. No one expected. The clock struck midnight, and the sound of the final chime reverberated through the dark, empty house. Moments later, a shot rang out, sharp, echoing, and final. Father Brown had barely crossed the threshold when the scream pierced the silence, followed by the unmistakable thud of a body hitting the floor. The murder had just occurred, and yet Father Brown already knew the one thing no one could have predicted. It wasn't just a random crime. It was a carefully planned execution, orchestrated by someone hiding in plain sight. Father Brown rushed to the source of the scream, his mind racing with possibilities, his heart heavy with the burden of what he might find. The victim lay sprawled across the grand staircase, her blood staining the elegant carpet beneath her. It was a shocking scene, one that sent a chill through Father Brown's bones. But it was more than just the brutality of the act that unsettled him. It was the victim herself. The woman, Margaret Hale, had been one of the town's most beloved figures, known for her charity work and philanthropic efforts. No one, not even Father Brown, could have imagined that she would be the one to die, and not in such a violent way. The police were called immediately, but Father Brown's gut told him this was no ordinary case. There were too many unanswered questions, too many strange details that didn't fit. The murder weapon, a pistol, lay just inches from her hand, yet her fingers had not touched it. No sign of struggle, no sign of a forced entry. It was as though she had known her killer, or worse, had invited them in. Father Brown's investigation led him to the house's library, where he found a letter on the desk. It was a simple note, unsigned, but its words were damning. "You have been a thorn in my side for too long. Tonight, I end it all. A friend." The note was cryptic and ominous, and as Father Brown's eyes skimmed the few words, something gnawed at him. A friend? Someone close? But who could have been behind it? The town had its suspicions, of course. Margaret Hale was a woman of influence, and with influence came enemies, but none of them seemed like the kind who would resort to violence, let alone cold-blooded murder. And yet, there it was. Father Brown began asking the right questions, digging deeper into the life of the victim, and the first clue he uncovered was more disturbing than anything he could have imagined. Margaret Hale had been involved in something dark, something that no one in town had suspected. The more Father Brown learned, the more confusing the case became. Margaret had been in a long-standing feud with her business partner, William Price. They had clashed on several occasions over the direction of their shared charity work, but Father Brown knew this wasn't enough to explain her death. Price had nothing to gain from her murder, and the evidence just didn't add up. Father Brown wasn't convinced, and as he continued to dig, something more disturbing came to light. Hale had been receiving anonymous letters for months, each one more threatening than the last, all warning her to stop her charitable work. But the letters weren't from Price. They were from someone else, someone who had been watching her closely. Father Brown dug deeper into Margaret's past and uncovered another shocking revelation. Margaret Hale had been hiding a terrible secret. She had been blackmailing several high-profile individuals in town, people whose names were tied to powerful families and corrupt businesses. Her charity work, which she had always portrayed as selfless, had been a front for something much darker: money laundering, bribery, and political manipulation. Margaret had been playing a dangerous game, and now someone was making sure she paid the price for it. As Father Brown pieced together the puzzle, he realized the truth was far more twisted than he could have ever imagined. Margaret Hale's murder had been the result of a carefully orchestrated plan, and the people involved were much closer to her than anyone had suspected. The blackmail, the secret meetings, the hidden alliances, they were all part of a much larger web of deceit, one that reached to the highest echelons of power. And in the center of it all was Margaret, the woman who thought she could control it all. But who was behind the plot, and why had they chosen to kill her now, after all these years? Father Brown couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this than just a simple case of revenge. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that Margaret's death was just the tip of the iceberg. Someone was pulling the strings from behind the scenes, someone with the power to destroy everything. And Father Brown was getting closer to uncovering who it was. The first major revelation came when Father Brown discovered a hidden room in Margaret Hale's house. Behind a bookshelf in the study, he found a safe, one that had been locked for years. Inside the safe, Father Brown found evidence that tied Margaret directly to the most powerful figures in town. It was a list, names, dates, and amounts of money, each one linked to a scandalous deal or a hidden crime. This wasn't just blackmail, it was extortion on a massive scale, and someone had gone to great lengths to ensure that the truth remained buried. But who? Father Brown's investigation into the list of names led him to the unlikeliest of sources, the local police chief, Thomas Ford. Ford had been a long-time friend of Margaret's, and it seemed that he had more than just a professional relationship with her. The police chief had been one of the individuals Margaret had been blackmailing, And as Father Brown uncovered more of the details, it became clear that Ford had been hiding something, something that could bring him down. Was Ford involved in her murder? Was he the one who had gone to such lengths to silence her? But just as Father Brown thought he was getting closer to the truth, another twist took him by surprise. The police chief's alibi checked out. He had been nowhere near Hale's house the night of the murder. The investigation seemed to have hit another dead end, but Father Brown refused to give up. He knew there was more to this case than anyone realized. The true breakthrough came when Father Brown discovered that Margaret's husband, George Hale, had been involved in a secret affair. The affair had been hidden for years, kept out of the public eye, but it was this secret that would crack the case wide open. George Hale had been having an affair with none other than the local businesswoman, Amelia Drake. The affair had been going on for months, and it had been a well-kept secret, until now. As Father Brown dug deeper into George Hale's life, he uncovered yet another shocking detail. George Hale had been in severe financial trouble. He had been embezzling money from the very charity that Margaret had built, and the blackmail was just the tip of the iceberg. But this was where it got complicated. Amelia Drake had known about George's financial troubles, and she had been blackmailing him, just as Margaret had done to others. But it wasn't just money that Amelia wanted. It was power. She had used her affair with George to gain leverage, to ensure that she could manipulate him into doing her bidding. Father Brown's mind raced as he pieced the final bits together. George Hale had been involved in his own web of deceit, and he had known that, if Margaret discovered the truth, everything would be ruined. In a moment of desperation, George had killed Margaret to prevent her from exposing him. The affair, the embezzlement, the lies, it had all come to a head, and in a moment of panic, George had murdered his wife. But the twist didn't end there. As Father Brown closed in on the final pieces of the puzzle, he received a shocking phone call. It was from George Hale, and his voice was filled with desperation. "You're too late," George said. "You'll never prove it. The truth will never come out." The tension reached its peak as Father Brown realized the full scope of the conspiracy. George Hale, in a final attempt to cover his tracks, had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated Father Brown's determination, and now, with the truth exposed, there was no way for George to escape the consequences. Father Brown stood alone in the room, the weight of the case heavy on his shoulders. "I know who did it," he whispered to himself. "But the truth will never be told." The walls closed in, and as the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Father Brown realized that some secrets were too dangerous to reveal. Chapter 11. Father Brown confronts the real killer. The moment Father Brown stepped into the dimly lit room, everything shifted. The air was thick with tension, thick enough that he could almost taste it. His eyes locked onto the figure standing by the window, calm, composed, but with a hint of fear that flickered through their gaze. The silence hung heavy, pressing down on Father Brown like a weight, as though the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating him with the burden of what he was about to do. "I know what you've done," he said, his voice steady, but the words trembled with an unspoken understanding. "And you're not going to get away with it." The words were a shock to the room, but even more so to Father Brown himself. He had suspected this moment was coming for days, perhaps longer. The twists in the case had only led him to one person, the one figure he'd once trusted, the one he never would have expected to be the murderer. But now, standing before him, the evidence was undeniable. The truth had finally emerged from the shadows, but it was far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The case had begun with a seemingly simple question: who killed the wealthy and influential Jonathan Vance? Vance had been a figure known for his charm, his political connections, and his booming business. His sudden death had shocked the town, leaving a trail of broken hearts and unanswered questions. The police had been stumped, and so Father Brown had been called in to investigate, tasked with uncovering the mystery that no one else seemed capable of solving. At first, it seemed like an open and shut case. There were motives aplenty: jealous business rivals, family members seeking to inherit Vance's fortune, and even a disgruntled lover or two. But as Father Brown sifted through the evidence, it all began to feel wrong. The more he learned, the more convoluted the story became. Each lead seemed to circle back on itself, and each potential suspect appeared to have an airtight alibi. Nothing made sense. Father Brown's mind kept returning to the victim's close associates, the ones who had the most to gain from Vance's death. His family was in turmoil, his partners were on edge, and his friends seemed oddly distant in the wake of his passing. But it was the people closest to him, the ones who had the most intimate knowledge of his life, that Father Brown could not ignore. The key to this puzzle wasn't hidden in the obvious places. It was buried deep within the relationships that Vance had built and betrayed. One by one, Father Brown interviewed those closest to the dead man. He listened to their stories, watched their faces for signs of deceit. And yet, each time, he found himself growing more and more unsure. Each alibi seemed solid, each motive seemed flimsy, until he found it, the hidden thread, the one piece that had been there all along, waiting for him to notice it. The first clue had come from an unlikely source: the housekeeper. She had mentioned something offhandedly, almost as if she hadn't realized the significance of her words. "Mr. Vance was very worried about something recently. I overheard him on the phone, asking if it had been taken care of." The housekeeper's words haunted Father Brown as he pieced them together with what he had already learned. Something about that phone call didn't sit right with him. Who was Mr. Vance speaking to? And what was the it that had been taken care of? That was when Father Brown began to focus on the business dealings of Jonathan Vance, realizing that he had been involved in far more than just legitimate ventures. Vance had been secretly financing operations that were illegal, deals that threatened not only his wealth, but the very fabric of the community. As Father Brown dug deeper, he learned that Vance had been at the center of a vast network of corruption, blackmail, manipulation, and hidden crimes that spanned far beyond the town. It was the second big revelation that threw everything into chaos. Father Brown had uncovered a letter, dated a week before Vance's death, addressed to an anonymous recipient. The letter contained a cryptic message: "The final deal is in place. You're next, and you know it." The chilling words were clear. Someone had been targeting Vance, preparing to take him down. But who was the person behind this threat? What had Vance done to provoke such a response? The next piece of the puzzle came when Father Brown stumbled upon a hidden safe in Vance's office. Inside, he found a series of photographs, photos of Vance meeting with various shady figures from the underworld. The photos painted a much darker picture of Vance's life than anyone had known. He wasn't just a victim of a business rivalry. He had been a key player in something far more dangerous. But it wasn't just Vance's business dealings that were suspicious. It was his relationships with those who were closest to him. Father Brown was led to a quiet corner of the town's most prestigious club, where he found the last person he ever expected to see involved in such a plot: Vance's wife, Eleanor. She had always appeared the perfect picture of a supportive spouse, standing by her husband's side through every business deal, every public appearance. But now, as Father Brown dug deeper into her past, he learned of a shocking secret. Eleanor had been involved in a long-running affair with one of Vance's most trusted business partners, and this partner, Richard Knight, had a more sinister role in Vance's life than anyone had imagined. It was Eleanor who had been the catalyst for the murder. She had been plotting with Knight to kill her husband, driven by a mix of greed, betrayal, and jealousy. The first motive was simple: inheritance. With Vance out of the picture, Eleanor would inherit everything: his fortune, his business, and the power that came with it. But there was more to the plot than money. Knight had his own reasons for wanting Vance dead. He had been secretly siphoning off money from their business dealings, and Vance had been getting too close to discovering the truth. Knight had killed Vance to protect his own interests. The final twist came when Father Brown discovered a shocking piece of evidence. Richard Knight had been the one who had orchestrated the murder. He had used Eleanor as a pawn in his own game, manipulating her emotions and her desires to get her to do his bidding. And when it was all over, he had intended to make it look like an accident, something that would never point back to him. But the pieces didn't fit. The lies began to unravel, and Father Brown realized that the true killer wasn't just one person. It was a collaboration of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. Father Brown stood before Eleanor and Knight, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth. "I know who did it," he said, his voice steady but filled with the gravity of the moment. "But the truth will never be told." As Eleanor's eyes filled with tears and Knight's face twisted with fear, Father Brown understood the finality of it all. The truth had been uncovered, but at what cost? The world was not ready to hear it. And now, as he turned to leave, the weight of what had happened lingered in the air, a burden that would follow him for the rest of his life. Some secrets, Father Brown knew, were better left buried, no matter how much they demanded to be revealed. Chapter 12. The Truth Behind the Choir Girl's Death. It was a scream that echoed through the cathedral, reverberating off the ancient stone walls and sending shivers down the spines of everyone who heard it. But what came after was far worse than the sound itself. The choir girl, young and vibrant, lay lifeless on the floor, her eyes wide in shock, a look of terror frozen on her face. Father Brown stood over her, heart pounding, as he realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't even a simple case of a young girl's tragic death. It was murder, and it was orchestrated by someone far closer to her than anyone had suspected. The first few moments were chaotic. The choir's beautiful voices were replaced by frantic whispers, gasps, and footsteps. A stunned silence had fallen over the room, broken only by the distant hum of the organ. But amidst the confusion, one thing was clear to Father Brown. The world of music, faith, and harmony that had surrounded the girl was nothing but a thin veil, hiding a world of secrets, lies, and dark motives. The girl, Eliza Harding, had been the youngest and most promising member of the choir. She had been known for her ethereal voice, one that seemed to resonate with the very soul of the church. The congregation adored her, and so did the choirmaster, who often praised her efforts in front of the congregation. But there was more to Eliza's life than just the praise she received from the church. She had been hiding a darkness that no one could have foreseen, a secret that led to her tragic end. Father Brown knew this wasn't just a case of some random killer. There was a motive behind it, something far more intricate and deeply embedded in the very fabric of the church and its people. But as he began his investigation, the truth only grew more complicated. The choir members, who had once been so close, began to show cracks in their stories. Each one of them seemed to have something to hide, and each one seemed to be as scared as Eliza had been in her final moments. The first clue came when Father Brown spoke to the choirmaster. The man's demeanor was composed, his face calm, but Father Brown could see the strain in his eyes. When asked about Eliza, the choirmaster seemed to hesitate, as if unsure of how much to reveal. "She was special," he said, his voice soft. "But we all knew she was struggling. She had her demons, you know." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. But what did he mean by that? What had Eliza been struggling with? Father Brown's suspicion grew. There were whispers about Eliza, about her past, and about her strange behavior in the days leading up to her death. She had been seen leaving the church late at night, her face pale, as though she were running from something or someone. The same choir members who had praised her voice now seemed to avoid talking about her, as if they were afraid of what might be revealed. The second big revelation came when Father Brown spoke with Eliza's best friend, Clara. Clara had been Eliza's closest confidant, the one person who knew everything about her, or so it seemed. Clara's face was etched with grief, but there was something else in her eyes, something darker. As Father Brown pressed her for details, Clara finally admitted that Eliza had been involved in something dangerous. "She was involved with someone," Clara said, her voice trembling. "But I never knew who. She kept it all secret. I begged her to tell me, but she wouldn't." Father Brown's mind began to race. Who was this mysterious figure that had ensnared Eliza? What kind of relationship had they shared? And why had Eliza kept it hidden from everyone, even her closest friend? Father Brown could feel the web of secrecy closing in around him, each thread leading him further down a path he couldn't yet see. As he continued his investigation, Father Brown uncovered a strange pattern. Eliza had been receiving letters that no one else had seen. Letters that she had kept hidden from everyone, even Clara. These letters weren't just simple messages. They were filled with cryptic warnings, threats, and pleas. Father Brown couldn't understand why someone would want to hurt Eliza. But the more he read, the more he began to understand that Eliza had been caught in something much bigger than herself. The breakthrough came when Father Brown discovered the contents of the letters. They spoke of a pact, a deal made long ago, one that had tied Eliza to someone in the church, someone she had trusted. But the more Father Brown pieced together the letters, the more he realized the truth. Eliza had been part of a secret that had been buried for years, and someone was willing to kill to keep it hidden. The first major clue came when Father Brown discovered a diary belonging to the choirmaster. The diary, written in the choirmaster's own hand, chronicled not just the day-to-day events of the choir, but something far darker, something that hinted at the choirmaster's involvement in something much more sinister. The choirmaster had been using his position to manipulate the young choir members, including Eliza. He had been grooming her for something that had nothing to do with music. The diary contained vague references to payments and sacrifices, and it became clear that Eliza's involvement in this dark scheme had been no accident. But it wasn't just the choirmaster who was involved. As Father Brown dug deeper into the church's past, he uncovered the disturbing truth. Eliza had been blackmailed, forced to participate in a ritualistic deal made by the church's leaders. They had promised her a future filled with fame and power, but in return, she had to give up something precious: her freedom, her innocence. She had become a pawn in a much larger game, one that involved power, control, and manipulation. The second major reveal came when Father Brown found out who the mysterious figure behind the blackmail was. It was a figure so close to Eliza that no one could have suspected them. The person behind the plot was none other than Father Harding, the senior priest of the church. He had been using Eliza to fulfill a deal made with powerful, shadowy figures in the town's elite. But what had they wanted from Eliza? What had she given up in exchange for the promises they had made? As Father Brown confronted Father Harding with the evidence, the priest's calm demeanor began to crack. Father Harding, usually composed and authoritative, now appeared nervous, his face pale and drawn. "You don't understand," he said, his voice shaky. "It was all for the greater good. Eliza's death, her sacrifice, it was necessary. It was part of the plan." The final twist came when Father Brown realized the truth behind Eliza's death. It wasn't just a ritual gone wrong or a case of blackmail gone too far. No, Eliza had known what was happening, and she had fought back. She had tried to escape. But in the end, she had been silenced, not by a stranger, but by someone she had once trusted. Father Harding had killed her to cover up the truth, to protect the dark secret that had been buried for years. Father Brown stood in the church, the weight of the revelation heavy on his shoulders. The truth behind Eliza's death had been uncovered, but at what cost? The darkness had won, and the cost of revealing the truth had been too great. "I know who did it," Father Brown whispered, his voice thick with sorrow. "But the truth will never be told." As Father Brown walked away from the church, the weight of the case lingered. The mystery had been solved, but the truth was something no one could bear to hear. The secrets of the church, of power and manipulation, would remain buried, hidden from the world. And Father Brown would carry the burden of the truth, knowing that some things were better left in the dark.